a brawl in Galveston, upside down pineapple controversy, and a significant push for cost control in the industry, this week's cruise news covers some major shifts. You're gonna wanna hear what's coming up, because this one, it's pretty wild. I'm Melissa, a university professor who loves to cruise and who loves to talk ship. And in this week in cruise news, first I wanna talk about the big story. You guys, there's another fight. Not just a fight, a brawl, a massive fight. And I love Carnival. If you follow my content, you know I'm Carnival's biggest fangirl, but they have a little bit of a fight problem. So a massive fight broke out at Port of Galveston as passengers on Jubilee were disembarking. I actually just disembarked the ship myself like 3 weeks ago. And this was massive. It ended up putting 24 passengers on the permanent do not sail list. But my question is, did Carnival do enough here to prevent this from happening? And are they really doing enough in general to handle these cruise altercations? A viral video of this brawl came out earlier this week, and it really left Carnival scrambling to answer these tough questions. The incident happened as passengers were disembarking from Jubilee on April 26th, and it's nasty. I personally hate physical violence. I can't stand it. It's hard to watch. I'm not gonna show it here because I don't wanna amplify it, but it's definitely out there if you want to find it. And it involved multiple altercations that quickly escalated into a full-blown brawl. Now, I have a lot of friends, some insiders that were actually on this sailing, and I've got some folks that live in Galveston, actually right near the port, and they work there as well. And what I heard is that it's two families, one of which is from Baton Rouge. And apparently the Baton Rouge family is very proud of being from Baton Rouge because as this fight escalated over the course of the 7-day sailing, they were constantly puffing up their chests and saying what Baton Rouge can do. So I don't know much about Baton Rouge, never been there, but I didn't know that Baton Rouge was known for being baddies, but I don't know. But anyway, two families. It started on the sport court one day earlier in the cruise, up on the basketball court. And it actually, again, happened a second time. That first escalation happened, then another one happened on the deck 11 stateroom hallway, and then it culminated in disembarkation, which is this huge, massive brawl. So it was these same two families that just decided they had beef. They don't like each other, and it just escalated to what you see with the brawl if you go seek out those videos. Now, Carnival's brand ambassador, John Heald, he did issue a formal statement confirming that the company's gonna follow through with what they said they were gonna do last year, which is we're not gonna tolerate this. We are going to permanently ban anyone involved in any physical altercation on a Carnival ship or its terminals. Now, I covered this in this very cruise pod about how Carnival was getting tired of this reputation and these viral fights that were happening. And so they did start to try to crack down more last year, and they implemented this fine. There's a fine of $500 for fight-related offenses and the cost of any damage that occurs if you get involved in a fight. And they also implement this ban for life. And their policy also says that you're gonna get booted off at that next port of call. But is that enough? Now, personally, I don't think so. I have a whole video I made last year where I talk about this, and this goes to show that Carnival is just still not doing enough. What I think the problem is here is that fine is way too low. $500, that means nothing to a lot of folks, especially when tempers are heated and they're not thinking. So I think they need to significantly up that fine. Look at a $10,000 fine and make it very public that if you engage in these shenanigans, you're going to literally pay for it. And the ban, of course, being banned, not just from Carnival, but from all CCL lines, Carnival, Holland, Princess, and also booting them off at that port of call. And do it in a very public shaming way. Make them do that walk of shame. Let it be known. Let people talk about the fact that these people were acting up. They're gonna get booted off at that port of call. Everyone watches like we watch for pier runners, and we see them get booted off. When you publicize these things, when you make it hurt, when you make it hurt financially, you make it hurt in an embarrassing standpoint, and you actually make them face criminal charges, that's the only thing that's gonna stop this type of behavior. So as you probably know, I've made a lot of videos and short posts about this issue before. I've made YouTube videos about this before, and it's really frustrating because I just don't think Carnival does enough. I appreciate that they're trying, but these sanctions, they're not good enough. And they're clearly not enforced. Because had Carnival really taken a hard stance when that first altercation flared up on the sport court, then it never would have happened to the second escalation, and then that third escalation, the brawl, probably never would have happened either. I don't understand why Carnival didn't boot these families off that first port of call early on in the cruise when they had their first fight. So I talk about this a lot, and I love Carnival. And there is one thing I want to address though when it comes to cruise fights, specifically on Carnival, is that I hear this all the time. And people think they're funny, and it's just really not funny. But I get really tired of people saying Carnival is the Section 8 of cruise lines, and it's ghetto. And I made a couple of posts about this, and every time I talk about this, the comments that come out are just disgusting and racist. So I get to the point, I spent 3 hours one night moderating these comments. I had to shut the discussions down. And I think it's important that we have an educated discourse around cruise fights, and specifically the culture on Carnival and what it is that makes Carnival more prone to fights. And more importantly, as a solutions-oriented person, what does Carnival need to do to respond as a corporation to stop this problem? Now, of course, it's not Carnival specific. Just last week in Cruise News, I shared with you the heartbreaking story of a man who got brutally beaten exiting an elevator on a Royal Caribbean ship. So fights, they do tend to happen most frequently on Carnival, and I would say Royal Caribbean probably second most frequently. Now, part of that is dominant share. Carnival is a dominant player in the market, followed by Royal Caribbean. Carnival holds almost 20% of the US cruise passenger market share. So when you are a big market player, you have a large presence, you have so many thousands of cruisers on your line every year, incidents like this are bound to happen more frequently. Carnival also positions itself as the fun ship. It also has a lower average age of cruisers, which for Carnival, that statistic is right around the mid-40s. And yes, in cruise world, that is young, believe it or not. So skewing younger, being the fun ships, really making kind of the alcohol culture part of the experience on Carnival, and holding that dominant market share are some contributing factors, in my opinion, as to why Carnival tends to be the cruise line that experiences more fights. And I think they have been way too lax in enforcing their own stated policy and addressing things when they do happen. I have personally seen more than a few altercations on Carnival ships. And security, I know they work really hard, and I know Carnival has beefed up security. I have seen it firsthand. But these security folks, they're usually pretty small. I'm a tall girl, 5'9", and I walk by these security officers, and some of them are like literally 5'5". And because they're on a cruise ship, they obviously don't have any weapons or law enforcement tools, even things like pepper spray at their immediate disposal. So already they have fewer tools with which to work. So Carnival really then is left with no choice but stronger penalties and stronger enforcement. So I ask everyone to please be respectful, and let's have a discussion about this. What do you think the problem is, and what do you think the solutions are? How can we as a community give our feedback to Carnival to give them ideas so they can actually solve this problem? Because I love Carnival, I hate to see their brand dragged through the mud repeatedly, and I hate to see a racist discourse that happens when people just call Carnival ghetto. In full disclosure, I grew up in the ghetto. My family, sometimes we were dependent on public assistance, so at a minimum, this type of language is disgustingly classist, but at the worst, it's racist. So let's have a real discussion about it, but leave all that nastiness aside and try to help Carnival fix this recurring problem. Up next is another Carnival controversy. Man, I love Carnival, but they do tend to draw more attention and controversy than a lot of cruise lines. And in this case, I want to know, is Carnival going too far by banning a specific door decoration? What I'm talking about is the upside down pineapple. If you're not familiar, the upside down pineapple is an indicator in cruise culture of folks that are engaged in the swinger lifestyle. And I've talked a lot about upside down pineapples because it's a big topic in cruise world and people always ask me, so I'll just say, I am not a lifestyler, but I also have literally zero judgment. I'm very much a live your life the way you want to live it, no judgment, but I'm a strict monogamist and I am with the man of my dreams. Now that we've made that clear, let's unpack a little bit about the history of this ban and the rationale behind it. Now, I reported last year that Carnival kind of rolled out a sort of soft ban on upside down pineapple symbolism. So people engaged in the lifestyle, they use upside down pineapples, usually door magnets, outside of their stateroom door to make it known that they play well with others. And Carnival ambassador John Heald, this man has been busy this week, last year made a comment in a Facebook post. He didn't even make a post, but he commented on another post. And in it, he indicated that Carnival had banned the upside down pineapple. Now that drew a lot of attention. A lot of people talked about it. I reported on it, and he quietly did a dirty delete and deleted that comment later and seemed a little bit to kind of walk back that stance. So there was some kind of ambiguity in the cruise world of, did Carnival officially ban this? Is it an unofficial ban? What's up with this? So a cruiser on Carnival actually shared on Facebook a letter they received in their stateroom where they had upside down pineapple magnets posted outside of their door, and Carnival took them down and left it in their stateroom with this letter. And in the letter, it basically said that the decorations were removed out of an interest of maintaining Carnival's family-friendly atmosphere. So to my knowledge, this is the first time that Carnival has officially enforced their ban on the upside-down pineapple. Now, they may have done it before, I just didn't hear about it, but it's clear that this is now an official stance, not something unofficial or not something John Heel just kind of casually posts in a comment on Facebook, but they're literally removing the door decorations. Now, of course, this got me thinking. I'm not a lifestyler, but I have to say, personally, I think this is a slippery slope of Carnival trying to prevent people from expressing their preferences. In my viewpoint, as long as it's consenting adults who are not breaking the law, they're not violating any cruise ship rules, they're not disrupting any other guests, and it's consensual, who cares what people choose to do behind their stateroom doors? So I want to know, by banning these symbols, is Carnival overstepping their bounds? I mean, what's the line between maintaining a family-friendly environment and also, since when did upside-down pineapples necessarily not be family-friendly? It's a pineapple. It just happens to be upside down. So what is that line and that balance between a family-friendly, comfortable environment versus infringing on personal expression and getting the business of what people choose to do in the privacy of their staterooms? But I want to hear from you. I feel like with most cruise issues, even those hot button issues, I can truly see both sides. But for me, I just don't understand why Carnival would waste limited resources and time enforcing this and making this an issue when let people live their lives. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't impact my vacation in any way. I can walk down a hallway and see every room has upside down pineapples. It doesn't affect me at all. It doesn't make my vacation any less fun. But I want to know what you think. If you think Carnival is justified in banning the upside down pineapples, tell me why. Maybe I'll change my mind. I don't know. But I think this is a little bit of an overreach. Up next, Norwegian tries to get a handle on costs. Norwegian Cruise Line is tightening its belt with a $300 million cost-saving initiative. But I want to know, are these cuts going to impact the Norwegian cruise experience? Well, here's what you need to know. Norwegian Cruise Line is now accelerating its efforts to save $300 million through a series of cost control measures. This includes cuts in payroll, fuel, food, and more. Now, of course, these initiatives, as they say, are aimed at streamlining operations without affecting the guest experience. But come on, that's some corporate bunk. You can't shave $300 million off of operating costs, especially in an industry that has already cut back and nickel and dimed their consumers to death without it affecting the guest experience more than it already has. Because we've seen this in the past. When cruise lines focus so much on cost savings, those changes don't always go unnoticed, and they just keep piling them on. So while Norwegian is telling everyone that they're focusing on improving efficiency and not at the expense of the guest experience, I have to be a little skeptical. And that leaves cruisers to wonder, when exactly is that tipping point where cruise pricing that's already steadily on the rise, when are these savings going to come at the expense of services? And when does cruising stop becoming an option that we want to pursue because it's no longer the cost-effective way to vacation? And if they cut services so much, it's no longer even a pleasurable way to vacation. Now, this comes on the heels of Norwegian stock recently dipping after missing some earnings expectations. So obviously that's probably the impetus for these cost-cutting measures. And the outlook for the future is uncertain. So fun fact, I am a real professor and I'm actually a business professor, so I'm keenly interested in business and economics. So I, for one, am going to be keeping an eye on this because this could be maybe a canary in a coal mine. This could be the sign of a larger trend in the cruise industry. Cruise fares are climbing, the experience is declining, it's already starting to feel like a bare bones operation. And again, I think consumers at some point, especially when they're feeling the squeeze and pinch of economic stress themselves, are going to finally walk away from cruising. So I want to know what you think. Do you think cruising is still enough value for your money? Or is the nickel and diming and the cutbacks getting out of hand? Is it influencing the way you're choosing to spend your vacation money? Or are you cutting back on vacations entirely? So I'm really curious to see what the cruise industry is going to look like over the next year. And related to that, could the cruise boom be over? Now, Norwegian has raised some red flags in their earnings report, as I mentioned, and they're implementing these cost-cutting measures that we just talked about. And in their statements, they're noting a softening in demand amid economic volatility. Their stock took a hit, and specifically, it was a net loss of $40 million in Q1. So with growing concerns about inflation and other economic factors, cruise lines are starting to maybe feel some pressure. As I noted, demand has been really high over the past few years, but is that sustainable? Now, Norwegian isn't the only cruise line feeling the pinch. Competitors like Royal Caribbean are also navigating similar economic turbulence, and Royal Caribbean has turned off a lot of their loyal to Royal crowds recently as they have shifted their strategy with their big ships, including some of the Oasis class ships, and taking them from the longer sailings to those shorter 4 or 5 day sailings in the effort of maximizing their bottom line. So that might be helping them from a profitability standpoint, but it's hurting them from a customer loyalty standpoint. So what does this mean for future bookings? While the cruise industry has been experiencing a post-pandemic surge, it's been crazy since 2020, and even the last couple years, I just see it rising and rising and rising. But I do wonder if the industry is now finally on the precipice of a slowdown. Now, only time will tell, and maybe I'll come back in 6 months and have a very different update to share with you. But this is definitely something to watch as the economic landscape continues to shift. And speaking of economics and laws of supply and demand, when it comes to demand, one cruise port is seeing a lot of demand, and they're betting big on the continued strength of that demand, and that is Port Canaveral. Despite these recent economic uncertainties, Port Canaveral is betting big and moving forward with a massive $500 million investment in upgrades. But will that be enough to keep up with the fluctuating demand? And will this come back to bite Port Canaveral in the butt if that demand falls off a cliff? Now, Port Canaveral is the second busiest cruise port in the world. It often jockeys with Port Miami as the biggest. And they've recently announced a massive $500 million expansion plan to upgrade and expand its terminals, roadways, and other facilities. As a frequent cruiser out of Port Canaveral, I say brava, because the roadways leading into the terminal is always chaos. Now, this expansion is aimed specifically at accommodating larger ships, but also improving passenger experience and increasing capacity. The planned upgrades include enhancing Terminal 1 with new canopies, refreshing the landscaping, and updating some walkways, along with a 16-month project to increase the size of Terminal 5 by a whopping 65%. Now, these changes reflect what we've been talking about, which is this increasing boom in demand of cruising. But with economic pressures mounting and more economic uncertainty than ever, will this massive investment pay off? And that's the challenge that cruise-related industries and cruise lines have to face right now. You've enjoyed this huge upward trend of demand, you've been able to increase your prices, you've been able to maximize profitability, but now is the tide starting to turn. So that's a wrap in this crazy week of cruise news. So what do you think about all this stuff? Please keep it respectful. Please let's have some elevated conversation, because I love when we can engage in smart discourse about cruising and not devolve to childish language. So let's talk about it in the comments, even if we disagree. Could Carnival do more to address onboard conflicts? What do you think about these economic pressures in the cruise industry? What do you think about being nickeled and dimed? I want to hear what you think, but respectfully. So drop a comment below. And as always, thanks for tuning in. And if you found this episode helpful, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, I have free port guides and a ton of great resources for cruisers at profmelissa.com.